the Ukraine. Oh, sorry. Yeah. So this event has been jointly organised by the Ukraine Solidarity Campaign. I'm very proud to be a supporter of that. And if you haven't joined, please join, please follow it. Please be part of our really important voice of people who've got experience of being in Ukraine, meeting Ukrainians, understanding the issue from a very kind of personal perspective. The other organisation is Another Europe is Possible, and I'm really proud to be on the National Committee of Another Europe is Possible. I've been doing that since before Brexit, which I have to say is very personal for me, because I was a Labour MEP for this region for 5.5 years, from 2014 until Brexit. Also Open Labour. I'm a member of Open Labour. I'm a joiner. Right? So I'm a member of Open Labour. I love Open Labour's open politics and the kind of inclusiveness of the organisation. It's great. It's another thing you can join, okay? And I'm on the editorial board of the Chartist, because I hate ironing, all right? So I just like to do lots of things, okay? So we do have some other Chartist people here. I'm going to ask them to put their hands up and wave, okay? John and Mike. Mike's the editor, and we've been selling magazines, and we are also very kind of supportive of this issue. We're trying to publish a lot of information about it, and we really want more Ukrainian voices writing about what we're doing. I should just say something about fire. Yeah.
Oh,
can you say it? Because I only know about Primark. Okay, so somehow or other, find your way to Primark if there's a fire.
I feel like I'm on an
Have they paid for this announcement?
In the event of a fire, run. So you turn left, basically you go through there's a fire exit, go all the way down the stairs, go through the garage, you press the green button, and then we go onto the street and we assemble at Primark. Or we could follow the first person to leave. So straight through there, downstairs and out. Okay.
And the toilets are apparently just outside the door, somewhere around there. I should have said, so I'm Julie Ward, okay? Right. The other thing I want to say is that there's a crowdfunder. We are raising money for much needed supplies for our Ukrainian comrades who are fighting for their lives. And we'd really love you to help us with that crowdfunder, to spread the word, to support it. We've got to help our friends, basically, and they need our help, and they need their voices amplifying, but they actually need stuff. Okay, they need medical equipment, they need a whole range of different things, and I think that's partly how we can answer that question: how can Labour help Ukraine win? So we've got, and I apologise actually also for not listing Tessa Milligan on the leaflet, but she's cool about that, okay? So, and I will introduce
I'm leaving her.
I will introduce Tessa when she comes to speak, okay? I've got a list here of speaking orders. So I'm going to give people roughly 8 minutes or less, okay? You don't have to speak for a full 8 minutes, I can tell you now, okay? But no more than 8 minutes, because we want to give time for that all-important Q&A. Okay. Yeah, so first of all, I'm going to ask Alex Sobel to speak to this question, and Alex is the MP for which bit of Leeds? Sorry, North. Leeds North. There you go. Alex is MP for Leeds North, and has been very, very instrumental in setting up Open Labour and attracting a wonderful, diverse group of Labour members, including lots of young people with masses of energy and creativity. So, and yeah, I'm really proud to be part of that. So, Alex, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Julie. I just realised that what we have is the organisers event are organisations Julie Ward is involved with. So yeah, it's very appropriate that you're the chair of this. I think that might have been coincidental rather than purposeful, but maybe I'm wrong. One of the reasons that I am so passionate and so involved with what's happening in Ukraine is my own family. My father's parents, both my father's parents, grandparents, came from Lviv, and we need to remember, and they lived through the Holodomor and the Holocaust, and now we have a third genocide borne upon the Ukrainian people by the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And that's in 100 years. There's not many countries, I'm not sure there are any other countries that have had 3 separate genocides wrought upon them in the last 100 years. And so, you know, we, whether you have connections to Ukraine or not, have a moral responsibility, and the Labour Party has a moral responsibility to support the people of Ukraine, not just now, but in the future. We'll talk a little bit about the situation now, and the advances that the brave Ukrainian soldiers have made in the last few weeks, and the mobilization of, I have to say, poor Russian young men into the Russian army. And the mobilization is because of Ukrainian advances, because the Russians have military has lost so many armaments, tanks, planes, men. Their supply chains are broken, their military command structures have broken down as well. The Russian military actually is not fit for a large-scale mobilization. They don't even have sufficient uniforms for these men. They don't have ability to train them. If you're gonna, just military terms, if you're gonna have a big mobilization like this, you need to have battalions which are half or a third full, and then you fill them and train them and mobilize them. That is not what's going on in the Russian army now. So the whole thing actually isn't based on military doctrine and preparedness within Russia. It is really part of the wider information war that's going on in Russia, to send a message saying, look, we are mobilized, we're ramping up, you should be scared of us. And that's why we have the other part of the information war, which is the nuclear terror that Putin is trying to push forward on us. I'll be honest, I've not been to Ukraine since the war started. I have spoken to the Ukraine Solidarity Campaign and I do want to go, but I was really clear. I don't just want to go on a like politician's visit, you know, you glad hand and have a photo with somebody. I wanted to go with aid supplies, and I'll come back to aid later, and actually be a useful part of the war, because otherwise you're just a drag on what's going on in Ukraine. Although it is, I have to admit, symbolically important, and it's important that Labour politicians go, because the other bit of this, which I'll touch on briefly, is that there is a perception within Ukraine, particularly of Boris Johnson, that it's the Tories that support Ukrainians rather than the UK and our people as a whole, and the entire political firmament. I'm not going to attack the Tories on this particular. I don't think this action on this is worth doing, but we need to step up, and I'm really glad Stephen's speaking out, because he has been, and Stephen has stepped up, and David Lammy stepped up, you know, and our leadership stepped up on this point, that we need to be doing more, and I feel that part of that is going with physical help, because they've got real issues around lack of medical supplies, food, etc. So coming back to where we are now, you know, we've just had what was a North Korean style set of referendums in the Donbass, which were done under duress and completely illegally, and which nobody internationally, apart from Russia's close allies, are recognising. The territory of Ukraine needs to be part of the country of Ukraine, both de facto and de jure, and that's the end game that we should be all supporting Ukrainians in. And I'm confident that the Ukraine will reach that point. But then actually, that's then the real role of Labour is there, because what I believe is that at that point, when Ukraine is free again and needs to rebuild, we'll also have a Labour government at that time. And the Labour government will have to step up, will have to get fully involved in the reconstruction of Ukraine. Ukraine's going to need something like the Marshall Plan, which happened in Western Europe after the Second World War, an international Marshall Plan. One of the ways of funding that Marshall Plan is the fact that we've got sanctions, and there are some holes in the sanctions, but there are tens of billions of pounds of sanction money in the UK, in other jurisdictions that the UK has, so British overseas territories, Channel Islands, etc. And they've done their job, they've frozen the assets in Europe, in the US, in other jurisdictions. There is enough money there, probably on its own, more or less, to rebuild Ukraine. That money needs not to go back to the Russian oligarchs. There's no going back to business as usual with Putin and his oligarchs. That money needs to be spent directly in the reconstruction of Ukraine. I won't, because it's Stephen's department, I won't go on about, and I'm sure he will, about what Labour and Labour government will do to reconstruct Ukraine, but I think we all need to really strongly understand that there should be no going back to normality with Russia, Russian oligarchs and the Putin regime, and they need to pay directly to rebuild the country they've just destroyed. I think I've finished really by saying that what we as a movement need to do to support Ukrainian workers, it's really great that Ivanna's here. That reconstruction will involve Ukrainian workers and other workers from around Europe and the world, and we need to ensure those workers have good rights, good pay, good conditions, and that also should be part of our commitment as a Labour Party with the trade union movement to ensure that any money that's flowing from us is going to Ukraine with workers' rights attached to it, and that should be part of our discussion debate with the Ukrainian government when it moves from being a wartime government to a peacetime government. You know, and I'm not going to be critical of anybody in Ukraine because they're very brave, but we need to ensure that things carry on in the right way as they have done up to this point. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. That's great. I should have said Alex is Shadow Minister for the Environment, and in fact there will be issues about the environment coming forward because of what's happening in Ukraine. We're now going to be joined by Olesia Briazgunova, who is the International Secretary of the Confederation of Free Trade Unions of Ukraine. I was in Ukraine in the 4 days leading up to the occupation. Oh, that's your time. with a political delegation. Paul Mason was there too, and some trade unionists. And I met Olesia then, and it's really fantastic that we've continued to have this relationship with the trade unions. So, Olesia, thank you so much for joining us. I know it's quite late where you are, but we're going to give the floor to you now. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for invitation and opportunity to speak. And I want to thank you for your solidarity, for organizing this conference and for your visit to Ukraine, because it was really important to feel your solidarity in Kyiv. I want to speak on behalf of the KVPU, the Confederation of Free Trade Unions of Ukraine, which is the second largest trade union center in Ukraine. But also today I speak here on behalf of my brothers and sisters who are fighting in this moment for our freedom and democracy, because just before this joining this conference, I sent a message to my young colleague, trade union brother, who are now in the Ukrainian armed forces. And also today, our brothers and sisters, they are saving lives as medical workers. They continuing to evacuate people from battle zones. For example, this week, our trade union helped to evacuate people from Donbas region. So it's the war is going on. And yes, we are happy to welcome the liberation and the occupation of cities. But this war is continuing, and this Russian war is aimed to destroy people of Ukraine who choose democracy and freedom. And also this war is aimed to totally destroy the economy. That's why Russian forces continuing to bombs and to hit infrastructure objects, civilian objects, enterprises, to make impossible for Ukraine to develop in economic way, and also to cause unemployment and job losses. But also, of course, this war is killing people, children, women, civilians, and also, as you know, Russian forces are committing war crimes. These awful, horrific facts of torture, rape, looting, mass killings that was carried out in Bucha and also in recently liberated Izum in Kharkiv region. And my colleagues were in Izum a week ago after the liberation of this city. One of them is Petro Tulei, deputy chairperson of the KVPU, and the delegation of Ukraine Solidarity met with him while they were in our office, and our colleagues were shocked by the scale of destructions in Izum, and these atrocities, and even this smell of death in this city. And people, civilians in this city, they need aid in any possible aid. Is food and some basic goods. But I also want to tell this that this war is also aimed to cause migrant crisis, ecological crisis, even political crisis, not only in Ukraine, but in the global level and in Europe. And also it's an attempt to cause food crisis and energy crisis. Today, our Confederation are trying to help civilians and to prepare for the winter time, because we understand the threats of blackouts, and that's why we try to provide people with space heaters and different things. And also, I want to say that we need your solidarity, and we need actions, real actions, to stop this war, and also to make to help Ukraine win this war. Because Russian troops, they must be not only to stop, but they must be withdrawal from Ukraine. And also, as you know, Russia trying to blackmail not only Ukraine, but whole world with attempts to use these nuclear weapons. So Russian Federation should be stopped, and that's why we as trade unions we ask for support of Ukraine, financial support, and also providing Ukraine with weapons, because we are fighting for our freedom. And former workers, they are now soldiers in the Ukrainian army. This is medical workers, railway workers, miners, and they are fighting for peace. They need also support, and we need any kind of military aid for Ukraine. Also, we ask for strengthening the sanctions against Russia, because it's one of the tools to stop it. And also we ask for the program of rebuilding of Ukraine, and financial support to rebuild the economy, to build new jobs. And also we need your support to ensure that this process of rebuilding will be with ensuring the social justice and decent work, because you know that there is an attempt to provide some changes to Ukrainian labor legislation, and to make it more liberal. And we understand that it will negatively affect workers who are suffering now, and who are mobilized also mobilized to help Ukraine to win in this war. We understand that democracy and our freedom is not for free during the Maidan revolution. And we paid our price for this opportunity to develop our democratic country. Now we can only repeat that democracy and peace is not for free, and not for free not only in Ukraine, but in whole world. And every liberated city cost the lives of our soldiers. And a week ago, there was a council of independent trade union of miners of Ukraine. And one of our leader of primary trade union from Dnipropetrovsk region, he said that since 2014, 200 members of union were killed during the war, and that their trade union are trying to do all possible to help families of these 200 miners who were killed because of war, and they died for our freedom and democracy. And trade unions of in Ukraine and workers, they need help, because our capacity and our financial resources are limited and also affected by war and crisis in economic crisis and job losses. So we are really grateful for your help, for your aid, for your actions and solidarity support. And please continue to support Ukraine. And I believe that together we will win this war, because when we was on Maidan revolution, everyone in Ukraine tried to help and volunteering, and we win. And I believe that we definitely win this war, because we have a huge support of people who are volunteering, can donate in Ukraine, and also we have a huge support from different countries across the world. So thank you very much for this opportunity, and stand with Ukraine. Thank you.
One of the things that I'm really proud of is that our organizations, our movements are giving a platform and a voice to Ukrainians to speak. And there are other organizations talking about this issue, and they're not really giving a platform and a voice to Ukrainian people. So I'm very, very proud of what we're doing. Olesia, is Olesia going to stay? I hope, Olesia, you might stay and take some questions later. Yeah, and
Yes,
also what other people are going to say. Okay, thank you. So now I'm going to ask Alena Ivanova to speak. She was part of a delegation that actually went to Ukraine in the summer. So everything is very, very fresh for her. And I know Alena through Another Europe is Possible, and but she's a fantastic activist and great human being. There you go.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you everyone for coming along. Apologies in advance to anyone who has already been to maybe the panel we hosted at the TWT festival. A little bit of what I'm going to say is going to repeat, but I think it's still worth kind of drumming these numbers and these figures into our consciousness. Yes, as Julie mentioned, I was part of a small but perfectly formed Ukraine Solidarity delegation to Kyiv at the end of August, and we were honored to be there actually on Independence Day and to witness the spirit of resistance of Ukrainian people on this day, which was supposed to be one of the more dangerous times in the last couple of months for Kyiv. I'm not saying this to big ourselves up for being there. I'm just saying people were out, people were celebrating their their holiday, their independence, and their freedom. And they were very clearly demonstrating that they will not be broken. So when people from Ukraine speak about resisting and fighting to win, they truly believe that, and I believe because of that conviction, they will win one way or another. We all hope it would be sooner rather than later, because as this war drags on, innocent lives are lost. But this is not a reason, this is not something to be used as an excuse to trade with their independence, to trade with their freedom, and to trade with their right to determine which country they're actually a part of. As for what we found out as part of the delegation, we met with Ivanna's Federation of Trade Unions. We met with Olesia's Federation of Independent Trade Unions. We met with individual trade unionists. And the picture that they presented, I'm not going to lie to you, is rather bleak. The facts on the ground are that on top of the casualties, on top of the political prisoners, on top of the disappearances in the occupied territories, on top of the interrogation, harassment, sexual violence, abduction of children, and you name it, torturing hostages and all the rest of it. For ordinary Ukrainians, this is an incredibly difficult period to live through economically as well as emotionally and psychologically. Wages have dropped by 20% already. 1/3 of workers have lost their jobs. A huge number of enterprises, factories, businesses are either suspended indefinitely or have been destroyed by shelling. Inflation is expected to reach anything up to 30% by the end of the year. So people are resisting and fighting in a situation of incredible uncertainty and insecurity for their own survival. We talk a lot about international aid going to Ukraine, and I think this is really important, and it should be applauded and it should be increased, but we should not be forgetting that within Ukraine, people are supporting each other in ways with resources that we can't even imagine. They have so little left, and they give it so freely to their fellow countrymen and women, who some of them have been displaced twice. There are close to 7 million Ukrainians who are internally displaced. Somehow that feels less scary than being refugees abroad. But what that means is, in reality, these people have lost their homes, they have lost their livelihoods, they have lost their communities, they have lost contact with friends and neighbors and the way of life that they had built. So being internally displaced, okay, they're still in Ukraine, but they're in no less need of support than people who are abroad. And then, of course, we have over 7.5 million Ukrainians who are spread across Europe, refugees at the moment. Britain, I would argue, has behaved towards Ukrainian refugees better than it normally does towards refugees, and this is something that we need to highlight and bear in mind, but it still has not done well for Ukrainians. We've set up this scheme called Homes for Ukraine, basically offloading government responsibility onto the ordinary people of the UK, expecting that they will house, they will provide support for people who are traumatized, for people who are completely separated from their communities. And so ordinary people are expected to carry the burden of that. And when these relationships and setups don't work out exactly as the government presented it in the first couple of weeks, in the rosy days of let's all bandy together and help refugees, people are left with nothing. I've read the report, and I hope you've seen it too in The Guardian recently, that this winter up to 50,000 Ukrainians are expected to become homeless because the initial promise of 6 months with host families is about to run out, and many hosts are worried about the increasing costs that they're facing, as we all are, and so they might not continue with the program. The government has not, to this day, announced a plan to deal with this situation. They are not giving local governments more resources. They are not supporting the people on whose charity and openness and warmth they depend. At the same time, they drape themselves with the Ukrainian flag and they say, look how well we've behaved. Look what a great ally we are to Ukraine. I'm sorry, but this is shameful. Another thing that I wanted to mention, which was made very clear in our conversations with comrades in Ukraine, is how interconnected different struggles that we in the labor movement and in the Labour Party recognize as our own are in this conflict. We talk about the armed forces as if they're somehow separate from workers, from trade unionists, from climate campaigners, from anarchists, from leftists of all sorts and organizations and affiliations. It's the same people that we support here and elsewhere that are now forced to fight in Ukraine. So why are we dividing them? Why are we pretending that it's not the same people who are defending LGBTQ rights that are also at the front, the same people who are fighting against the degradation of our environment, who are now at the front, the same people who are normally organizing solidarity collectives and mutual aid groups that are now forced to fight, the feminist collectives of Western Ukraine and of Kiev who are now forced to fight. It's the same people, and it's the people that we would in the labor movement normally recognize as our own, but somehow we feel it's a bit icky that they're holding guns. They don't choose to hold guns, they have to do it. And the sooner we recognize that and the sooner we offer them our unconditional support, the sooner they'll be able to return to organizing, to building a socially just and fair Ukraine. And that leads me to the next point and kind of final point, rebuilding a socially just Ukraine. It is not somehow undermining the Ukrainian resistance to talk about what plans, what conversations about reconstruction are already happening and will be happening. Indeed, it's to strengthen our support that we need to recognize in the coming months and years, Ukraine will need the support of the labor movement internationally, because people there, ordinary people there, will be under incredible attack from the IMF, from international banks, from hedge funds, from all these people who are already circling like vultures over Ukraine, planning to extract whatever they can once the fighting is over, and some of them actually not even waiting for fighting to be over. So we need to be very clear in our commitment, and I'm glad that Alex mentioned it. Yes, hopefully by the time it gets to that point, we will have a Labour government, but it should be a Labour government that is prepared to fight alongside Ukrainian people, even if it's at that point against their government, to make sure that they get a better social contract at the end of this, because otherwise, why have they wasted so many lives? Why are we seeing the mass graves, if not to build a better life for Ukrainians and a better life for all of us, with less energy dependence on Russia, with a more integrated and collaborative trade union space. And on that point, I also want to really thank Chris and everyone involved in the Ukraine Solidarity Campaign for introducing me to the wonderful comrades that we met in Kiev, and also to Ivanna for hanging out with me for the last couple of days. It's been great to learn from you and to try and show you a bit of our movement as well. Thank you very much and keep supporting us.
Thanks very much, Alena. I came to quite an intimate meeting when you returned, and actually your testimony was really harrowing. I think in a way we cannot escape the truth of what is happening, and that those stories have to be told, as difficult as they are. Okay, so I kind of wanted to make that point, because here we're talking about political action, but actually behind that are really horrendous crimes against humanity. We were due to have Simon Weller, who is, oh, there you go. I was like, look at that. Come up here then.
Well, I'll be in the way of the screen.
No, if you sit, because Alex is gone. Okay, brilliant. I'm so glad you're here. So I let Alena go on there extra to her 8 minutes. I thought that she was on a roll. It was really important, but partly because that chair was empty. So anyway, Simon, welcome. Simon is Assistant General Secretary of ASLEF, and I'm actually very, very proud that when we made our delegation visit in February, just before the war started, the occupation started, Mick Whelan was on our delegation, and it was absolutely crucial to have Mick there, you know, as a trade union leader working to support an industry that has become absolutely vital to the war effort. So you're very welcome here, Simon. The question is, how can Labour help Ukraine win?
Okay, right. Thank you very much, Roger. I'm Simon Weller. I'm the Assistant General Secretary of ASLEF, which is the Train Drivers Union in the UK. I was a train driver for 20 years before I became a full-time official, before I took the role of the Assistant General Secretary. Now, why am I bragging about my time as a train driver? It will make sense in a moment. As part of the delegation with Christopher and Alena, I managed to visit a railway depot. I wanted to meet with railway workers, and I wanted to meet train drivers. Now, I was in the depot in Kiev, where I met the reps at the depot, and I went in the reps office. For those trade unionists in the room will know the shop steward's office and what it looks like. Let me tell you, it looks the same the world over. These are always grubby little broom cupboards somewhere in an office. Anyway, I was invited on Independence Day, and Olesia was my interpreter, which I was very, very grateful for, and where I met Alexander and Vladimir, who were the reps at the depot. And they provided sausage, cheese, tomatoes, and of course vodka. And we sat and discussed what all railway workers discuss, which is just how terrible the railway is. But also, Vladimir thought it would be a very important point that I saw the locomotives at the depot. And train driver, I'm a sucker for trains. So we went around the depot. It was very clearly put to me that I wasn't supposed to be there, because railway depots are effectively military installations, and there are a lot of heavily armed men at these depots. So he said, you can come around and see the locomotives, but you mustn't speak English, because a foreigner in what is in effect a military installation is a problem. To the point that Olesia wasn't coming round to do any interpreting with us. I thought, I don't really want to see 40-year-old Soviet locomotives quite that much. But anyway, we went round. And it's that kind of stuff that's really, really important. And whilst we were talking about how we can help each other and what we can do, there were a couple of guys came in. They were in uniform, going back to rejoin their battalion, and they were in their late 40s. And one was a guard, one was a fitter, and they were reps as well, and they were coming to see their mates before they went back to the front. And I said, but to some surprise, I'm 50, 54. And I said, but you're quite old, why are you going to fight? And it was probably translated quite bluntly. And they said, we're in our 40s, we've had our children. We are fighting so that the young people who haven't had children have a chance to have children. That's why I wanted to meet the rail workers. And the question is, what can we do What can Labour do? What can the Labour movement do to assist these people? I think firstly, we can start dispelling myths, calling the myths out within our own movement. You know, you'll see people are saying, oh, this is NATO aggression. It is not NATO tanks rolling into people's towns and villages. It is not NATO missiles that are hitting the suburbs of Kyiv while we were there. And I'll tell you now, there is nothing more chilling than air raid sirens across an entire city. This is not Dad's Army or Goodnight Sweetheart. This is grinding reality. It's not NATO troops that are carrying out summary executions or sexual violence. It is the Russian Federation. That needs to be called out. And I know there are a lot of our comrades who seem to conflate Russia with the Soviet Union and have some kind of rose-tinted view of what Putin is doing. Maybe that's why he deliberately uses the iconography of that corrupt death cult that was the Soviet Union. You know, the hammer and sickle, the red star that is still being trotted out, that is still quite attractive to a lot of our comrades. Now, I say I have a very firm view on this because, as I said, I'm quite old. And in the 1980s, I spent a lot of time in the GDR to see East Germany, to see socialism in action. Advice to young men is always have a girlfriend who can't leave her own country. But I tell you what, I don't have a rose-tinted view of those regimes because they destroyed the lives of my very dear friends that grew up in the GDR. And we must call out this support. And I will say that I think the work of some organisations, such as Stop the War, is actually destructive. Are we not, as a movement, anti-imperialist?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
What we're seeing is colonialism. And just by the support, either economic support, moral support, or solidarity support, but the best thing we can do is call out those lies. And it's going to be tough. You're not going to make yourself popular doing it, but it is so important. Anyway, thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Simon. And it is so good to have the support of both of you, both Nick and yourself, in this struggle. Really, really, really crucial. Thank you. I want now to introduce you to Ivanna Khrapko, who I met when we were there on our delegation. Ivanna is the chair of the Youth Council of the Federation of Trade Unions of Ukraine. And we met in in the building on Independence Square, which I believe was the hospital during the Maidan. Am I right, Paul? It's the place, sorry, you weren't there, no. But this building on Independence Square is really, really,
and then they had to rebuild it.
it's really, really, it's a key kind of part of the story of the struggle. Our meeting, we were sitting, sorry, it's a story, but I think it's important. We were sitting at an oval table and all the leaders, probably about my age, our age, sitting around the table speaking, and Ivanna was in the back row. And actually what I could see was a light in this person's eye. I could see engagement in Ivanna's eyes. I could see she had something to say. And so when I had the opportunity to ask a question, I didn't ask the people sitting around the table. I said, I want to know what the young person at the back thinks. Okay? And when she spoke, it was extraordinary. It was amazing to hear her speak and her passion and her ideas about campaigning. And this was before the war, when we still thought the war wasn't going to happen. And I said to Ivanna, you need to come to the UK and you need to teach mobilization and campaigning to our Labour members. And I can't tell you how proud I am that she is now here, sitting here with us and able to speak. So give Ivanna a big round of applause, a big welcome.
So, hi everyone.
Sorry, that was his alarm.
Hi everyone, one more time. So, you know, for me, it's like a miracle that I'm here during this day, that I can meet a lot of great people, a lot of young people, and one of them sitting here now. And, you know, today it's 216 days of war in Ukraine. Because when Olesia speak, when our comrades speak, I try to remember the first our online meeting when you organize, when we talk about solidarity, and I try to remember my feeling. And what I can say now I can say that, you know, our Ukrainian people, it's totally brave and inspiration people. Why? Because I talk now to you in behalf of our members of Youth Network of Federation of Trade Union of Ukraine, in behalf of my comrades who fighting now in the front line and also who continue their work in Ukraine, in the west of Ukraine, in the center of Ukraine, in place where are a little bit quiet. And this is people who their life changed incredible, because before war we have one plan, and now our trade union work like divided to some parts. One part is our volunteering work. You know, when you for example, me before war, I didn't do something like volunteering, like I don't know nothing how organize this process, how everything is work, you know, because it's like 100 contacts you have to every time manage in your head. But when we started, it was, you know, like maybe 2 or 3 days after we organized themselves, and our young members, we start to connect each other and talk what we can do. We don't wait for like someone of our like a chairman or a chairwoman said us like, okay, Ivanna, you have to like do like this. No, it's like a, you know, it's like grassroots organization. It's like a, what maybe real trade unionists have to do when something happens. It's like our duty, our work. So we organize our voluntary initiative Trade Union Lifeline. For me, it's like a new example of solidarity what happened, because in Ukraine we have different trade unions. For example, like I'm from Federation of Trade Union of Ukraine, Olesia from Independent Confederation of Trade Union, and also we have a lot of different sectoral trade union. But in this moment we didn't think about from which sector we are. We sketched this different, and we started to do together. And you know, trade union, it's a great network, because you have contact in all of territory of Ukraine, and it helps us because we have direct connection with our comrades, with our members in the west, in the east, in the south, north. It's not depend, but we connect with them. We try to help them. We found accommodation. We deliver aid, and for me, railway workers in Ukraine, I named them deliver angels, because in our trade union Lifeline we engage also youth network of railway workers and infrastructure building, and every time they help us to deliver our aid by train, because when we started it was very difficult to deliver from bus sometimes, but for train it was also and even now it's very dangerous, but we work together. We packed this wagon. It was, you know, it was incredible. And also for me, I was engaged in evacuation process together with our comrades from railway. And you can't imagine what it means when railway workers work during 1 month without some weekend. They go to the east, they evacuate people, and they work not only like railway workers, they work like psychologists, they work like, I don't know, they cook some food, they talk with people, they have people to go to train. It's incredible, but we work together and we volunteering together. But also what it means when you can talk with people who engage in evacuation, and also you can see all of these things, because in KU now, where we are, where I am living now, it's a little bit quiet. But when you go to the east, when you go to the south, you see these people, and I saw people who was in basement like during 3 or 2 weeks. I saw children, and it's very hard because they live in their home, they lost their home, but it's very big problem with their mind. It's one of the reasons we, together with our youth network, we continue to do our education event even more. We try to engage our young leaders, and we had 3 education offline physically meetings during the war. Now it's really hard, but we did it, and we talked with people in one side about legislation, because we had really bad change in legislation process now in Ukraine. It's true, but also we talk with people about their. We try to help them with psychology. We try to talk with them what they feeling, ask them what they feeling, because also one of side of trade union work. You have to talk with people every time, and you heard 100 stories. People can ask you about different kind of topics, about legislation, about work condition, about what they said, what they need, starting from food, finishing by, I don't know, but help find accommodation in some of Europe countries. And we try to help our trade union leaders to work with this in psychological side. Also, one of our way of work is international connect. Why it's very, very important. Like you give us this stage to be here and to talk true story and share with you true feeling and information what happened now in Ukraine. Because all of you see and feel this terrible Russia propaganda, and this every time it's totally lie what they say, and it makes us angry, because I know that there are some discussion in Europe about negotiation, but when you talk about negotiation, you didn't start to mobilization, you didn't start to pushing our workers who work in nuclear power plants, because it's terrible. In our youth network engage some people, not some, maybe a lot of people who work in nuclear power plants, and one of them, she is my deputy in youth network, and she's still in Energodar in Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, and we have with her like very safety contact, because I'm really worried about her. And she said how they in Energodar, for example, find some leaders and took them to the basement and torture, and it's terrible. And when you talk about negotiation, you didn't do this. You don't do this. When you talk about negotiation, you didn't continue bombing nuclear power plant station. You didn't talk about nuclear weapons. You didn't do this liar referendum, because it's about our real life, and it's these things where I'm worried about it very well, because very big. Okay, sorry for my English, because tomorrow I come back to KU. I will continue do my work, and it's this condition which I live in there, and it's this question which my friends and comrades will be asking me, also about weapon. I think our duty, like trade union leaders, to talk about support with weapon. Because bullet vest, it's not a weapon, it's about protection. And I remembered when we had like meeting in the spring, I was really very angry when someone said me that trade union can help with buying bullet vest because it's like military stuff. I ask them, these people, sometimes I like be not polite, because I ask them, when my comrades fighting in the army, and I have a lot of them who are now engaged in the army, who are in the west of Ukraine, who are in the south, who was wooden, who was died, who saw all of this terrible situation in Zoom, which Olesia mentioned, and maybe you know about it, because it's one of my friends from railway, he texted me, not yesterday, maybe like on Monday, that he said, Ivanna, it's like Irpin and Bucha in general. It's more than 450 people who was killed, tortured, and boring. I forgot this word. Yeah. It's he talked. Let's talk about smell, and he texted me, Ivanna. You know, I walk around and I feel this smell, and it's totally frustration. So if I trade union leader, I have to talk every time about it. And you know, during this day, I met a lot of people here, a lot of great people here. And I hope that all our conversation, all our struggle help our members. And United Kingdom, you know, before a war, really, we haven't contact with trade union from UK. We haven't. Now I know along GMB, I know public and commercial services trade union. I met with the TUC. I met with great people from Youth Network. I know that we can work together. We can teach our members. We can support our members. We can have some common projects. We can develop trade union movement. But in other side, it's a little bit, for me, it's a little bit sad because, okay, because the reason it's a war. Because the reason it's a war in this case. It's so sad. But you know, I hope and I know that Ukraine win. We will win in this war. I know that we will continue work together, and I hope that you, like a leader of trade union, like leaders, because if you come here, you feel this, you have this feeling about support. You can talk with your colleagues. You can talk when you engage in some delegation in Ukraine. You can talk with our government. Then we have changed. We have developed. We have changed a lot in our legislation, and I know that UK can help us in this. We can talk about support our comrades who are fighting now, and I know that together we will do it. And I want thank you one more time for this, that I meet with Julia, because it was amazing. And I want to say Slava Ukraini and in solidarity.
Thank you so much, also for speaking not in your native language, speaking in our language, and it's incredible that you're able to come here and do this. I'm giving Tessa the chance to go to draw attention to that. Tessa was on my list next.
Stephen is just
Stephen's just coming, great, okay, just save the day, right, okay. So Stephen, you're going to be on next, but I'll just tell a little story, okay? So my love affair with Ukraine began in 2011. I'm a theatre maker, I'm an artist, I'm a writer, I worked in the cultural sector, and in 2011 I took part in a year-long cultural management exchange project with Ukraine, and I'd never been there before, and it was the beginning of my love affair with the country, my meeting with the people, and actually I had those cultural connections, and in a way I was quite shocked that that hadn't happened through the kind of workers' movement, because I was doing it as a cultural activist. We were already doing it. So I think what you said today is really important, but we're not looking to the past, Ivanna, we're looking to the future, and Ukraine will win. Yeah, it will win. Okay, fantastic to have you here, Stephen. Okay, you're coming just at the right moment. Okay, so really pleased that Stephen Doughty MP could join us. You are Shadow Minister for Europe still, are you? Thank you. Great. Okay, it changes, so I'm never quite sure. Okay, so we're asking people to speak to this question: how can Labour help Ukraine win? Okay, so the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thanks, colleagues, for having me here to speak today. Apologies for the state of my voice. I've been speaking at lots of different events. I think, firstly, I'll just explain where I come from on Ukraine. For me, this is an extreme point of principle, but it's also a personal story. I spent time in Canada when I was younger. There's a huge Canadian-Ukrainian population. I have many Ukrainian-Canadian friends. I actually used to dance hopak a long time ago when I was younger and thinner. But I learned about the wonderful Ukrainian people some time ago, and many of them have remained dear friends to me. And actually, in my early 20s, I went to teach English in Lviv, and had fantastic experiences there. And also, many of you will know about the very, very close links between Wales and Ukraine. Not only do we have people like Mikantanov, who's a good friend of mine, who is Ukrainian Welsh in the Welsh Senedd, but also it was a Welsh man who helped found Donetsk. Hughes, used to be Hughes Vicar. It was those incredible links between Luhansk and Cardiff. John Healy spoke about similar links in his speech, but where Luhansk miners sent aid to the Welsh miners during the miners' strike, and it's why Cardiff is still at least nominally twinned with Luhansk. And it was actually, of course, a Welsh journalist who was one of the first to uncover the horrors of the Holodomor. So our links, our traditions, our histories of hard work, of industry, of solidarity, of community, I think are one of the things. One of the Ukrainians visiting the conference said to me, why is there this link? Why is there this link between the UK and Ukraine? I think there's just something fundamental in our cultures and our histories, and part of that is deeply rooted in the working class traditions and the community and solidarity that's very evident, obviously, in South Wales, and certainly is evident in Ukraine in all my experiences of dealing with Ukrainians. I was utterly horrified when the events of February took place, but I have to say, we keep talking about the war having started then. It didn't, of course. This is a war that has had a long genesis and a long and dark history as well of imperialist oppression. And we'll think of the Holodomor. I went to the monument that goes back obviously to the 1930s and beyond, where millions lost their lives. 2 weeks ago, I was in Kiev. I travelled out with a cross-party group. I met with many Ukrainian friends, members of civil society, and others, and I saw for myself the devastation outside Kiev, in Bucha, in Hostomel, in Irpin, where some horrific atrocities have taken place that we know of, tragically more now being uncovered in Izium and elsewhere. I saw the residential buildings with the rocket holes through them. I saw the places where deeply, deeply horrific things had happened. But I also saw the resilience of the Ukrainian people, and I took away with me one particular thing, which is just how this is a terrible but also a unifying moment for Ukrainians. And I've speaking to people from individual soldiers to individual citizens to right to the top to President Zelensky. It's very, very clear that this is a whole country effort. I met one of my fellow MPs, a Ukrainian MP who had himself crowdfunded huge amounts of money from friends and bought extra equipment and personally driven it all the way up to the east, right up to the front, and he came running up to me and showed me, what they've been doing, which was the positive side. But he also showed me some pretty horrific images as well of what they were uncovering there in Kharkiv. And I've been in a number of war zones around the world. My background before coming into politics was in the humanitarian sector, and I worked in Department for International Development in the last Labour government. But I find it hard to believe as an MP, as their daily job now, not holding a surgery like I do, or going out to a community event, is having to drive equipment, basic equipment, up to people who are fighting for their lives and fighting for their country on that front line against some of the worst wicked barbarism that we've seen in Europe in decades. And I'm afraid it has all the hallmarks. I was recently in Kosovo as well. I was recently I will be back in the Balkans shortly, and I've been to Srebrenica, and I'm afraid we see all the hallmarks of some of the very, very worst types of things that humanity can bring about. So what can we do? What can we do? I think there are a few things. I think firstly, it's not let this drop off the agenda. We've made a decisive decision here at conference to make sure that Ukraine was front and centre. And you'll have seen today, those of you who've been delegates or attending the conference itself, we had a Ukrainian MP speaking, Olesia, a good friend of mine. We had a Ukrainian British choir. You heard what Keir had to say, you heard what David said, you've heard what John Healy has said. We wanted to make sure that this remains in people's attention, because there is a danger of the so-called fatigue setting in, of people's attentions turning elsewhere, and understandably so when people are facing very, very difficult hardships here. But we've all got a duty, all of us in this room, all of us in this movement, to make sure that we don't forget, because this is going to be a long and a hard battle, but it's one that can be won, must be won, not only for Ukrainians, but for the sake of all of us in Europe and indeed the world. So firstly, it's keeping it live, keeping it on the agenda, having events like this, bringing other people involved. I think secondly, we need to do much more on the left in the UK to be building relationships and telling the truth about what is happening to our partners across the rest of Europe and indeed the rest of the world. I've been taking particular interest in speaking to colleagues from sister parties and sister movements across Europe. Every single meeting I have, I raise Ukraine, and I'm going to be trying to create a Friends of Ukraine group across the PES and Socialist and Democrats group in Europe, because we know, and I won't name particular individuals or parties, but we know that solidarity and support is not in all of the left centre parties in Europe, and that is causing real and serious consequences for decisions that governments are making about whether they do or do not support Ukraine, practically or otherwise. And again, some of the things I've been told, I'm not at liberty to sort of share in this room, but they deeply, deeply concern me. And so we've all got a job through our links with other parties, with other trade unions, with other movements, to be making sure that people know what is happening, know why it is right that we support Ukraine at this time of struggle, and that they challenge their own governments or indeed their own party leaderships to be doing far, far more. So that's the second thing. And I think the third thing is obviously the very, very practical support that people have been providing and continue to provide, whether that's union to union. I met some of the pharmacists union members who were doing support on medical supplies. I know many, many colleagues who are obviously going out to provide assistance in different ways. People fundraising, people providing a home here for Ukrainians fleeing, and also providing support to many of the excellent organisations that are out there that are doing brilliant work. And my colleague Preet Gill went out very early on in this phase of the conflict out to the border with Poland and met with many of the organisations, working closely with our sister party in Poland actually, to ensure that we were going and speaking to organisations that were working on the border there. And I think it's worth recognising just the immense amount of support that is coming from organisations, particularly in the countries nearby. And I was totally struck actually crossing the Ukrainian border 2 weeks ago, literally 30, 40 kilometres of HGVs backed up on just one border crossing in both directions, showing the scale of the logistical operation, the scale. But that is going to have to increase over this next 90 days, this next critical period over the winter, because it is very, very clear. I was there when the initial gains were being made in the east, and that Putin initially responded immediately with horrific attacks on the electricity, water and civilian infrastructure of East, putting 9 million people into darkness the night that I was there. He is going to do every tactic to harm the civilian population and to harm the resilience of Ukraine, and targeting energy, civilian infrastructure, water, hospitals, schools, roads, bridges is going to be at the heart of that, and we all have a job to do to make sure that we help Ukraine become more resilient through that period, but also that we're going to be there for the long haul, because this is going to be a huge reconstruction effort. There's already been amazing things done. I saw a number of the bridges already being reconstructed and lines being opened. It's incredible what is happening, but it is very clear the scale of the devastation and what may be to come. So, as I said, a very difficult situation, but one in which I believe there is hope. I am absolutely convinced of the justness of this cause, the resilience and fortitude of the Ukrainian people, and that this can be won and must be won. As I said, not just for the sake of Ukraine, but for all of us, because if we don't stand up against this sort of imperialist oppression and autocracy and the sheer flagrant violation of anything that we all hold dear to being human, whatever our politics, then we are heading into a very dark place in this world. So, thank you all for being here, and thank you for the solidarity you are showing.
Okay. I'm going to give the floor next to Tessa Milligan, who is chair of Open Labour. Tess.
Wow, it's hard to speak. I'm really moved by the things that I've heard tonight, and it's really an honour to be sharing a panel with so many great speakers, especially you, Ivanna. It was great to hear you speak. So I'll try my best, but I am feeling emotional. I wasn't expecting to after I think on the British left, because of our history and the way we have always been slightly removed in a way to things which have happened on the European continent, sometimes discussions about foreign policy get boiled down to a bit of a sixth form debate club. And in Open Labour, we've really tried to break free of this and to be bold in arguing for an ethical foreign policy. In the winter of 2020, so long before this war began, we published a foreign policy pamphlet, and it contained a lot of different ideas, and it focused on the idea of human security. The idea that we should prioritise the security of human beings, and maybe perhaps sounding a bit old-fashioned when I say this, but I'm a firm believer that the working class has no borders. And of course, when we published this, we were attacked by the usual suspects to our left and to our right. Several months later, the Mail on Sunday and the Sun, and I think the Express, ran several attack pieces. Of course, we were loony lefties. These were crazy ideas, and of course, there were those to our left in Stop the War, likes of Andrew Murray, who you think would be at home polishing his Picassos, but had time to write a few blogs about it. But of course, those of us who occupy this part of the left have never found this difficult. I'm sure there are many people in this room who campaigned and marched, for example, against the Iraq War. Good evening. And of course, everyone in this room, I'm sure, feels deep solidarity with Ukraine as they face the Russian imperialist aggressor. So in terms of how Labour can help Ukraine win, Ukraine Solidarity campaign is occupying a very, very important space in the Labour Party and in the wider Labour and trade union movement, to be able to advocate for this line of thinking, which, to be honest, I think most people in this country are sympathetic towards. And so it's really fantastic what you're doing here. In terms of perhaps other views then in the Labour Party, and of course also outside the Labour Party and in the Labour movement, there's a sort of wishful thinking. I'm sure we'd all love to live in a world where there were never any wars. That would be so nice. That would be so easy. But we don't. We live in a world where there are evil people who do evil things. And sometimes we have to think about our own values and what they mean, not just in theory, but what they mean in practice. And that does lead to difficult conversations and difficult realities that have to be faced up to. Simon mentioned the time that he spent in the GDR. My family spent a lot of time in Czechoslovakia. My mum moved there when she was younger than me. That's a whole other story. And so I have a very deep affinity for the Czech Republic, and we have many friends there. And I don't mean to draw parallels, they are very different situations, but there is a degree of post-traumatic stress that was triggered for many of our friends in Czechia, and who are old enough to remember, you know, when the tanks rolled in. And so there is a natural affinity for many of our friends of solidarity with Ukraine, to understand what it is to face the threat of imperialism, to understand what it is to be occupied, and the need for freedom and self-determination. But we have also seen another conversation open up in the Czech Republic. Of course, a lot of people here will be aware of a march that happened a few weeks ago through Prague, which of course was led by the far right. But unfortunately, they were also joined by parts of the left in the Czech Republic, communists, and of course the usual sort of anti-vaxxer, conspiracy theorist, unholy alliance. And I'm afraid that this is what happens when there is a kind of perhaps complacency on the left and in generally progressive spaces, that of course this is a noble cause, this is a just cause, this is a right cause. Therefore, we don't need to spend time advocating for it ferociously, defending it ferociously. If we leave a vacuum, somebody else will fill it. And in terms of, we've spoken a lot about international solidarity. We need to have this kind of solidarity and to be able to build these networks and build these links when there isn't war on, when we are in times of peace, so that we can always go back to those networks that already exist. I spent the summer working in a pub down in West Sussex, and I spent a lot of time driving through very rural parts of the country, and there were Ukrainian flags everywhere. I was blown away. They were everywhere, like all through these streets. I never expected it. Ukrainian flags on lampposts, flying from people's houses, flying from, you know, farmland. And I do really think that the majority of the country is behind us, is behind Ukraine, believes that we should stand shoulder to shoulder with Ukraine. So, the question, how do we help Ukraine win? The question really should be, how do we help our friends who are being brutally and senselessly attacked by an imperialist aggressor? And first, we show what socialist internationalists call solidarity, which of course is what we are doing here today. That's never enough. By all means, call for peace, but not in a one-sided way, not in a way which has outdated views of what anti-imperialism means, one which recognises what imperialism means in the 21st century. And we must give Ukraine as much as they ask for. I'm a really, really firm believer in this. It means training their people in their fight for freedom, because if the left is for anything, it is surely for freedom from war. It is surely for freedom from torture, from crimes against humanity. And sometimes you have to fight for that. In a very, very real sense, you have to fight for peace. Because without fighting, you succumb to genocide and war crimes and the darkness of totalitarianism. So to help them be free, we train them, we arm them, we give them the means to fight their fight, and we give them that quickly, again and again and again and again, until they win. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Tessa. I had a kind of moment where I realised I wasn't a pacifist. This war, seriously, I'm serious, okay? I've spent a long time being in CND and other organisations, and because of what I've experienced, my friends going through, I realised I'm not a pacifist. I cannot be. That this is just, it is just, and actually coming to that conclusion by having those conversations, and to hear you as such a young woman speaking like this is really, it's really inspiring, Tess. Thank you so much. Okay, and now to Chris Ford, okay, who's the person behind, who does masses of incredible work behind Ukraine's Solidarity Campaign, who first introduced us to the social movement.
Thank you very much, comrades, and I just want to say thank you very much to everyone who leafleted for this meeting in the pouring rain. It's through these last few days. I mean, I've not been there enough, so I'm very grateful. The question, and I'll try and address as quickly as I can, not to keep you, but was how can we help? How can Labour help Ukraine win? So let me begin by saying, why should Ukraine win? Why must we help Ukraine win? And I'll begin. There's two parts to this that I want to pose. I think we need to restate, and we should keep restating it. Firstly, it's right. This is a war, first war between states in Europe since 1945. This isn't a war between equal states, and I mean by that this is a war between the historical oppressor and the historically oppressed. It's a war between an imperialist power and the nation it has oppressed for centuries. And in that, we are obliged, as a labour movement, as a party, as trade unionists, to side with the oppressed. The Ukrainian people have been oppressed under the Tsars for 300 years. Their language was illegal. You couldn't go to a school and be taught in Ukrainian. You couldn't buy a newspaper. You couldn't read a book. They suffered institutional discrimination and savage violence for every expression of their national identity, and had to struggle against that to assert their self-determination, which they did in 1917, and they constituted their nation as a republic. They suffered for years under a totalitarian regime, which is, as Simon outlined, they survived and came through the horror of Stalin's famine. They came through Hitler's slaughterhouse, and they proved their resilience and reconstituted themselves as an independent nation in 1991. And we talk of referendums, these phony referendums. Ukrainians voted overwhelmingly for independence, on an 84% turnout and a 92% yes vote. In Donetsk, which we are told now is Russian, 83% voted yes to independence. In Crimea, also they voted for a majority for independence. And the borders of Ukraine were forged in the 20th century, recognized by the UN, and indeed recognized by Russia and by the USA when Ukraine handed over its nuclear weapons at the Budapest Agreement, where they had their sovereignty so-called respected. The Ukraine has proved itself the right to exist as a nation, and the war being waged by Russia is to turn the clock back. It is a war with explicit genocidal intent. Under Russian occupation, there is no possibility to exist as a Ukrainian. You'd either be killed, you'll be evicted, or you'll be forcibly Russified, as they're doing it in the occupied areas. In a war, a genocide, for us, there is no middle ground. There's no middle ground for the Ukrainians between life and death, and there should be no middle ground in our solidarity in that situation. It should be automatic. And I find those who, after 7 months, are still struggling with that question, quite frankly, contemptible. The fringe of our movement who take that position. I find it quite frankly contemptible that anyone should give a platform to any person who denies the massacres at Bucha and Irpin, which is happening. I find them repugnant. These are sewage pipe socialists who don't speak for our movement. And the second point as to why we must want to help Ukraine to win is that the invasion of Ukraine is an expression of the attack on democracy globally that is taking place at the present time. The growth of authoritarianism and of a new form of appearance of fascism. We've seen it happening in Europe at this present time, and the front line of that struggle is in Ukraine, in the Donbass, and in the south of Ukraine. On that front, the Ukrainians are fighting. Russia hasn't invaded Ukraine to denazify it. It's Russia who represents authoritarianism and the most racist and extreme right-wing government that exists there. A friend of mine came back from Moscow when this war began. He was there for 11 years teaching English. 2 days into it, he got out. He described to me, year after year, he considered he was seeing the growth of fascism in that country. And Russia does have many of the hallmarks of fascism. And it's because of the nature of that regime, because of the history of oppression, that we see this savagery, this atrocities, this racist violence which has been inflicted on Ukrainians. And the reality of it is, we now know that in all those areas which are currently occupied, when they're liberated, there'll be more evidence of such atrocities, which is also part of the reason why the sooner Ukraine can win the war, the better to liberate those areas and bring freedom to the people under occupation. And how we bring this about began to address today, and I welcome very much that we've adopted a policy in the party. Yeah, there may be parts I disagree with, but there is much to be taken from our policy that can be built on, and we need to take forward. The campaign, we played our role in submitting motions to conference with our comrades in the National Union of Mine Workers. And of course it was compositing. I think it's very welcome that we have a policy of the party which is upfront that declares solidarity with the resistance of the Ukrainian people. Unequivocal. It's very welcome that we recognise that the suppression of human rights and oppression began in 2014, not in February this year. You know, the war in Ukraine began when Crimea was annexed, and Russian regular troops also intervened in the Donbass in August 2014. It's important we recognise that because it points to where this war ends and what the just outcome can be. And it's important that we have a policy that will support Ukrainian trade union appeals for aid. And it's very important that we have a policy that we support a free and a united Ukraine, and not one that then would point to any unjust partition that would consign thousands of people to Russian occupation. And it's important that we've adopted that, and that we have a policy that supports a socially progressive reconstruction that involves civil society and the trade unions in that process. These are significant policies that we need to build on and campaign on and ensure that the front bench, which I'm sure they will, take forward their engagement with this government, which wraps itself in the flag of Ukraine. And it's also important that we have a policy that calls for justice for the victims of war crimes, because we need a new Nuremberg for the crimes of Putin on it. On top of this, there is more that I think we need to do, because I think whilst there are things that the UK government has done that could be welcomed, there's much more that needs to be challenged too. And in the motion we put forward as a campaign, I believe we did set out concrete actions that I think continue to be relevant. Most of all, we have argued, and we think we should say it, that the Western governments have not provided sufficient weapons to Ukraine to win the war. And we need to argue this. I don't accept the declarations of Boris Johnson or the current Tory government are sufficient in any manner or form. Of course, Ukrainians are going to welcome any assistance they can get when your backs are to the wall, but we don't need to do that. We know at times, we've experienced it. In April, they announced a whole swathe of aid, and only not that long after, we were receiving appeals from mine workers for exactly the same things Boris Johnson had promised, that weren't getting to the front. And I want to make a contrast. I went back and I looked at what the Labour government reported in 1946, the aid that the UK gave the Soviet Union to help defeat the Nazis at that time. And we supplied 5,218 tanks and 7,411 aircraft. The UK has given no tanks to Ukraine. When the Nazis were driven from Kiev, there was actually British tanks on Khrapko. Today there are no British tanks. There are a number of destroyed Russian tanks, which is very welcome on it. We could give tanks to Ukraine because the MOD are upgrading their Challenger tanks, and by my calculation, they're going to have at least 79 spare very shortly, all of which should be going to Ukraine. And indeed, I would say they should give the whole 227. Yeah. Poland, a country much poorer than the UK, has given 200 tanks to Ukraine. 200. In terms of aircraft, we can provide thousands of pounds worth of assistance to a reactionary regime like Saudi Arabia. We can provide training and material aid, which the UK is doing, but they haven't provided aircraft to Ukraine. And I think we need to be making that demand. I'm not going to accept the grand declarations of this government. I want to see enough weapons going over there that can end this war sooner in a victory. Equally, in terms of law that I think we need to be taking forward, is we also argued, and I think we should have said it clearly, we should condemn those who attempt to exploit the economic crisis, the cost of living crisis, to undermine support for Ukraine. There is a clear Kremlin strategy across Europe to exploit the economic situation, to undermine support for Ukraine, and to blame the war for all the ills of Western capitals in this situation. We should refute that, and we should challenge that, and that's why it's important that we need an agenda as a party to go out and campaign for Ukraine. We called for a day of action that the Labour Party should undertake, and I think they should still do it. And I hope that the National Executive, this will be taken up, to go out and show that the Labour movement doesn't just pass policies in Ukraine, but we're going to campaign, and the streets or town squares aren't just going to be filled with reactionaries from Stop the War, but from the Labour movement, making the case for Ukraine from the left, from the trade unions, and not just saying we support Ukraine, but we want more support for Ukraine to win this war. In addition, I wanted to touch on the issue of aid. In Europe, sorry, we are part of Europe despite Brexit. On the continent, there are constant convoys going to Ukraine from the trade union movement. Providing aid. We've not had any convoys to the UK. I'm not saying there's been no aid from trade unions. There's money given to the ITUC. We've organised aid, a small way, but yeah. We need to be seeing a far bigger effort in these big unions who can raise tens of thousands to give to the Ukrainian trade unionists on the front. The winter is coming. We're receiving constant appeals. Comrade Olesia has sent me appeals, Ivanna, these soldiers are in desperate need on it. And it's not all coming contrary to the myths of this massive flow from NATO. We have a duty to show to these people that we in the British trade union movement will provide just as much as our comrades are on the continent. And I would like to see a change on that. So what we heard this week wasn't just declarations, there's going to be practical assistance going to start taking place. In addition, I wanted to raise finally the point that a comrade in our campaign, particularly Nottingham, have raised, and that's the POWs. As we know, a number were released. There are still 2,500 Ukrainian POWs being held. Many still from the Azovstal, fought heroic there. And we need to be keeping that alive, I believe, in the current situation. And I just want to conclude on this point. I think there is glimmers of hope for optimism at the present time. The offensive in Kharkiv has sent shockwaves through Russian imperialism. There is a possibility we could be on the verge of one of the biggest defeats of Russian imperialism since 1989. They've been shown not to be this military power they were made out to be by the Ukrainians. Their hegemony over the other nationalities in Central Asia, Georgia, even Moldova, people are questioning the authority of Russia. Their security alliance is in tatters. They're pulling troops from the Baltic. They can no longer guarantee to prop up that regime in Belarus. The more Ukraine can win, the grip of Putin and Russian imperialism will loosen. And I hope, as in 1905 and in 1917, we're going to see democratic revolution in Russia to bring them down. But most of all, we want to see Ukraine free, united, and independent. Peremога.
We've got 20 minutes or so, even a bit longer, for questions. Before I do that, I want to announce again about the crowdfunder. If you're on social media,